gang, this week's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Hey, LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates that you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free now at linkedin.com/good seats. That's linkedin.com/good seats to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And now, here's our show.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Costas. As we all know, St. Louis is the best baseball town in America, and you are right now in the heart of Cardinal Nation. But as at least some of you know, St. Louis's Major League history is not confined to the Cardinals. Because for decades and decades, until the midpoint of the 20th century, there was another team in St. Louis. Mostly a losing team, but a team that at one time had a first baseman who hit 400, at one time was the Major League home of one of the greatest and most legendary Negro League stars, at one time had a pitcher who would go on to pitch a World Series perfect game. At one time they were owned by this guy, Bill Veeck, who among other things sent a midget up to pinch hit. They were the St. Louis Browns, the forerunners of the current Baltimore Orioles. And they're part of St. Louis's baseball story too.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Well, hello there. Welcome. My name's Tim Hanlon. It is Good Seats Still Available. You know what this is all about. It's a podcast. We've been doing it for almost 5 years now. It's devoted to what used to be professional sports. Thanks for coming on by. If you're a return visitor, we can't believe you've come back, but we are very thankful you've done so. If you're brand new to the proceedings, well, where you been? We're happy to have you too. And what an episode we have for you this week, because it's about a team that has been long on the list for us to cover. I wouldn't say it's sort of been hiding in plain sight, but it's as we've dug into it and it's sort of hit our radar with increasing force. We recognize that this is perhaps one of the more well-supported defunct and no longer with us teams in the realm of pro sports. And we're just kind of embarrassed, frankly. We've taken this long to get to it. It's the St. Louis Browns. Yes, the baseball team that co-inhabited Sportsman's Park for many years in St. Louis. You people in St. Louis obviously know the St. Louis Cardinals. But I think for people from the outside of the realm of St. Louis, and frankly, even a couple of generations since, don't even recognize that that was a two Major League Baseball town for many, many years. And the Browns were, I think the original lovable losers. The Cubs certainly have taken on that moniker, maybe have shaken it off a little bit with a fairly recent World Series win and some decent runs at success. But the St. Louis Browns, nobody sort of rings the bell for them as one of the best teams ever in baseball history. Far from it. As a matter of fact, they were quite lamentable, at least on the field, their on-field performance. So they had a couple of competitive seasons here or there. The only real sort of glory, I guess, was the 1944 World Series that they lost ultimately to the crosstown St. Louis Cardinals. Yes, the 1944 World Series was an all St. Louis baseball affair. But that was pretty much it in terms of on-field glory, shall we say. But it is a lovable team for sure. And our conversation this week is with Ed Wheatley, who, among many things, I guess you could call him sort of the chief curator of this story of this baseball team known as the St. Louis Browns. Of course, if you're a Baltimore Orioles fan, although it's you're forgiven for not sort of raising your hand in full force the last couple of years, given just how woeful that team has been. You may know, of course, that the St. Louis Browns were the originator or the original team that moved to become the Baltimore Orioles in the early 1950s. We get into that part of the conversation as well as a bunch of other stuff. Bob Costas kind of tease us up here. You get a little bit of a sense of all the excitement and drama and just quirky history of this team. And Ed Wheatley will go very deep into lots of different sort of nooks and crannies. So we can't get into the entire multi-decade history of the Browns in just one podcast setting. But it's safe to say people like George Sisler, a wonderful player in baseball history, Pete Gray, a very interesting character in his own way, Eddie Goodell, for you, of course, you trivia buffs know, his pint-sized story as part of the St. Louis Browns. And of course, nobody could forget the years that Bill Veeck owned the St. Louis Browns baseball team. Lots of interesting twists and turns, and you're going to hear a lot of the history can be I guess, encapsulated in the term "what if." So many different sort of pivot points where the Browns franchise, as you'll hear in our conversation, could have gone in very interesting and perhaps more memorable and maybe, frankly, still domiciled in St. Louis manners and ways. But it was kind of not meant to be, and that's arguably part of the charm as the remembrances of the St. Louis Browns continue. I got a lot of promotional stuff you'll want to hear at the end here, but there are a couple of books that Ed's been part of and or authored. One's called Baseball in St. Louis, From Little Leagues to Major Leagues. We'll tell you how to get a copy of that at the end of the show. St. Louis Browns, the story of a beloved team, with his co-writers Bill Borst and Bill Rogers. That's a wonderful book, too. A couple of films, actually, that you can find on 9pbs.org, N-I-N-E, pbs.org. That's KETC-TV in St. Louis. Two wonderful documentaries that you can stream for free. One is called The St. Louis Browns, the team that baseball forgot. It's narrated by actor John Hamm. And there was a follow-up, also Emmy-nominated, by the way, both of these films, called A Baseball Legacy, Fans Remember the St. Louis Browns. And again, at 9, pbs.org, you can stream these films. But, of course, the seminal place you need to go and bookmark, and it's sort of your locus for all things St. Louis Browns, is the St. Louis Browns Historical Society fan club. It's a whole bunch of things. TheSTLBrowns.com. TheSTLBrowns.com. And that's sort of the passion project of Ed Wheatley, our guest this week, as we talk about, and again, embarrassingly late, the St. Louis Baseball Browns. We get into the conversation in just a few moments' time. A couple of quick sponsor notes here. Two great ways to celebrate our final recognition of the great St. Louis Browns franchise. How about RoyalRetros.com, the king of throwbacks, RoyalRetros.com. Our pal Dustin Alameda in I was going to say Phoenix. That would be ridiculous. He's in Portland, Oregon. Completely different climates for sure. Check him out. 503 Sports is the sub-brand. RoyalRetros.com is the site. The Browns jersey is there for you in well-crafted and original styled 503 branded sports fashion, if you'd like to get a lovely version of that. They also have a St. Louis Browns beanie, which is pretty cool, a St. Louis Browns long sleeve T-shirt. There's even an old St. Louis Browns crest T-shirt as well. But just some great stuff there about the St. Louis Browns. And you can get them with your, certainly the jersey, with your name emblazoned on the back or somebody else's name. And there are a couple different versions of the Browns jerseys. There's one with sort of the word Browns across it. There's another one with sort of a sort of scripted Browns version. There's another one with the scripted St. Louis version. A couple of different versions. Check them all out at royalretros.com. And of course, use that promo code SEATS for 10% off all of your purchases, including these wonderful St. Louis Browns jerseys for you to choose from. And last but not least, why not, of course, check out our pals at Ebbets Field Flannels. That's Ebbets, EBBETS.com, Ebbets.com. And you will find just an absolute exquisite offering. It's their part of their Major League Baseball Authentic Jacket series. It's this, I cannot describe it to you adequate enough, but the St. Louis Browns 1952 version of their authentic jacket, it's as highly quality. The quality is stupendous. It's a brown wool body and sleeves. It's the exact reproduction of the team jacket worn by the Browns in 1952. It's American-made brown wool body and sleeves. It's all wool knit. There's the embroidered patch with the cute little Browns, what would you call him? Sort of like pixie kind of guy looking. logo, zipper front, black quilted lining inside. It's gorgeous. And Brownie, that's his name. That's the logo in there, is on there. And it was just, it's what they were wearing 2 years before they bolted for Baltimore. The St. Louis Browns 1952 authentic jacket, just one of a whole series of gorgeous authentic jackets and a ton more, of course, in sports clothing and authentically done at Ebbets Field Flannels. Again, that's ebbets.com, EBBETS.com. And of course, we want to save you some money at Ebbets Field Flannels, and the promo code there for you is Good Seats 10, the number 10, Good Seats 10 at ebbets.com. Thank you both to Jerry at Ebbets Field Flannels and Dustin at royalretros.com. We thank you both for your longtime patronage or at least sponsorship of the show. And we thank you, our great listeners, for sticking around for our fun conversation. Here it comes, coming up here with Ed Wheatley. Let's talk St. Louis Browns baseball, shall we? Please, as always, enjoy. One of the teams that has eluded me, and I don't know why I'm just finally getting around to it, but has just a fascinating history, as you well know, is these St. Louis Browns. And I guess I'll just start with, how did you sort of come into this St. Louis Browns story? Because Lord knows they haven't been around for a long time.
58 years.
Yeah. So what's your entree to it? Fan, family, St. Louis, something else? What?
Well, I think it's about 3 or 4 tentacles of that tangent. The first is, I'm a big baseball fan. I grew up in baseball. My dad played professional baseball, and when he no longer played professional baseball, St. Louis had just one of the most tremendous semi-pro leagues in St. Louis, in the country. And in the late 50s and early mid 60s and it was comprised of so many men who played pro ball. Any team of 16, 18 guys probably had 10, maybe 12 guys who played professional baseball. And growing up and, being a bat boy and things like that, a lot of the St. Louis Browns stayed in St. Louis. So I got to know these guys and was, at a very young age, cognizant that there was this other team beyond the St. Louis Cardinals, which I'm a big fan of the Cardinals. Season ticket holder, playing the Cardinal fantasy camps, and I still play baseball myself. I play about 100+ games of senior league baseball across the country. So have all this motivation, and what was going on was, believe it or not, there is no Brooklyn Dodgers fan club. There is no Philadelphia Athletics fan club. There is a fan club of sorts led by 1 or 2 guys that put out like a letter type thing once or twice a year for the Boston Braves. But in 1984, the St. Louis Browns fan club was created. Kind of a 40th memory of the 1944 World Series. And Bill Borst had seen some things up in Cooperstown when he went to Pee Wee Reese's, his favorite ball player of all time's induction into the Hall of Fame, and he saw the Brooklyn Dodgers fan club. And he thought, why doesn't St. Louis have one? Because Rick Farrell was being inducted that same day, and there was nobody there, rah-rah-rah and him and on. So that kind of led to this evolution. And then what happened was, we'd have activities, annual reunion dinners or luncheons were held every year from 1984 on. And, it was this thing where players would come, people would come. And St. Louis is just a phenomenal baseball town. I mean, that's, other areas of books I've written
it's
about.
also like a big small town in some respects, right? I mean, I'm a relatively new transplant to Chicago, the Midwestern thing, but St. Louis and a lot of these other Midwestern cities, right? It's big enough, yet it's also small enough, right? So this familial thing that you're describing shouldn't be a surprise to people in the area.
And it just goes back to the roots of St. Louis in baseball. And that's, a different book I wrote, Baseball in St. Louis, Little Leagues to Major Leagues, which was, has done outstanding across, picked as one of the top 25 books of 2020, one of the picked both of these two books were selected by a poll last summer of 100 best base books of all time. But, it's just partly the way, I write them. But St. Louis has such baseball roots. I mean, there were times in the late 40s more men were in Major League Baseball from one high school in St. Louis than any other high school in the country. Our American Legion teams were tremendous. In the Cardinals, the Browns, the Negro League teams, the Stars and the Giants were just, there's just this culture and, the institution of winning from the Cardinals, next to the Yankees, they are the most. This radio presence of Jack Buck, Harry Carey, all these years. Joe Garagiola was in the booth as well. It's just you have this embedded fan love. So what you do is you grow up. Baseball's the religion. Opening day is that special holiday, so you have this present, and people love it. So we were having these these luncheons and dinners, and the men who were running it, all of a sudden they were getting up to the age, late 80s or early 80s, retirement, their health, many passing on. And I was retiring in 2016, after a 36-year career somewhere else. And I said I would kind of like to get involved at this leadership level and help run this. And it was starting to, as these other leaders were getting old, it just was losing a little steam and what have you. And, and in my mind, this is a history that shouldn't be forgotten. This is something that is special. This is baseball. And the thing that's different about the St. Louis Browns, as I mentioned, the Brooklyn Dodgers, the Boston Braves, the Philadelphia Athletics, they don't have fan clubs. Well, what do they have? They have a franchise that waves their flag. You go out to Dodger Stadium and you see across the walls the history of Brooklyn, all the great players of those Brooklyn teams, their 1955 pennant, all that stuff, and their rivalries with the Yankees, the Giants. It's there in Dodger Stadium. You go to, Oakland and you'll see Connie Mack's pennants that he won back, all those years, decades earlier in the 20s, 30s, with the Philadelphia Athletics. You go down to Atlanta and you see, the bits and pieces of the Boston Braves, the Milwaukee Braves. You go to Minnesota and in the Minnesota Twin Stadium, they have a big, huge room and section that's dedicated to the Washington Senators. But if you go to Baltimore, you don't see much, or you don't see anything about the Browns. And we've met with the Oriole front office and executives, and they said, and this is the same quote they said when in 1954 when they left town, the St. Louis Browns died. They were buried in St. Louis, and their legacy did not come east. And they chose to put their heritage into the Baltimore Oriole minor league team that was formed after the Baltimore Orioles in 1903 moved to New York and became the Yankees. And then from 1903 to 1954, they had this great, and it was a great dynasty in the minor leagues. But they don't, you won't find a 1944 pennant. You don't find, statues of George Sisler, all these men. And as a result, this history is forgotten. And I said I would take over. And one of the things I was going to do, there wasn't any real great definitive book on the St. Louis Browns throughout this history. So I said, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to use the archives we have, and I'm going to get some publicity going for the team. But also, more importantly, share this memory with the baseball world. And what it led to, not only was Sports Digest picked as the best book published on baseball in 2017, SABR nominated us for the Larry Ritter Award, and PBS came and said, can we make a movie of this book, which with a local St. Louis PBS network, which we did, and received Emmy nomination. And it also was the highest record-setting watched PBS film in St. Louis, and also had the highest pledge drive giving as well. And as a result of that, I remember that while we were in the middle of the film and we were doing a pledge drive, the CEO comes running in and says, "Oh my God, we can't keep the phones off the hook. This is unbelievable." And I said, "Do you have anything else?" And it was like, yeah, there's a whole section that I wanted to put in the film that we couldn't. It's like, let's do it again. So we've actually done 2 films. They've both been Emmy nominated. I've won Emmy awards. Cooperstown has picked up both of the films for their annual film festivals in 2018 and 2019. So we've really kind of regenerated that there was a team called the St. Louis Browns. They're not the team baseball for you got because we don't have a franchise that, recognizes us and promotes us. I mean, even today, if you went out to, MLB's Monday early morning, they put a letter out or what the hottest things in baseball. There was a story that I did for MLB on Charlie O'Reilly. He batted in 1934 at the age of a week shy of 59 years old, the oldest guy to ever bat. And, it's so many of these little oddities are there about the Browns. And as a result, in St. Louis, as I said, it's a baseball town, but we have over 700 active people with the Browns nationwide. And every year we have a luncheon, except for last year, 2020, we didn't have it. We had a dinner or luncheon, but we generally go to luncheons these days. And we have over 400 people attend. It's amazing, the love of the St. Louis Browns.
It's interesting that you mentioned, usually this is a question we kind of wait till the end, but I might as well get to it now. And you sort of hinted at it, but the question generally revolves around, in situations like these, right? Especially for teams that have, I like to call them sort of previously domiciled, right? Whether they took the name, the nickname with them or not. We do find on so many occasions, it's basically a cul-de-sac of where the quote unquote official history or memories or memorabilia or any of that kind of stuff does and should live where it should be, right? And the historians and the statisticians will say, well, of course, it's with the Orioles. That's the team that moved on, and although they do want to distance themselves perhaps from the records, I guess, of mostly of the Browns. I think frankly you could ask anybody who's an Orioles fan, like where have they been the last, say, 3 out of the 4 seasons, right? 48 games behind, 49 games behind, and I think in 2018, 61 games behind first place. But I digress. So is it Baltimore and or should it be? Or should it be perhaps in St. Louis instead, especially given what you've just described? There was essentially, it sounds to me like an abandonment of the team.
There was. Actually, I wasn't there to watch it, but there was a bonfire where the Orioles, as they were packing up, because there's 2 parts to it. There was a bonfire. A lot of the records, uniforms, those things were actually destroyed.
When was this?
1954. The last game was played by the Browns in September 1953, and in 1954 they moved to Baltimore. And actually, there was just less than a dozen of the players who were with the Browns actually made it on that team in 1954 with Baltimore. So there was this real cutting of the ties. So we have been able to gather a lot of memorabilia from the previous owners, especially Donald Barnes. His family had been outstanding in giving us all his records and things. And we have built it up from people donating and wanting to keep it alive. I mean, and I'll tell you about some of the events that we do throughout the year, just besides this luncheon. I mean, we do multiple roundtables. We do this night at the Grizzlies. Now, the roundtables, what we'll do is we'll do one kind of like a hot stove one in late January, early February, where we pick a topic. Maybe it's George Sisler, one of the greatest men to ever play the game by far. It was ironic. His grandchildren came and, not only provided his own personal memorabilia, but told the stories that he would pass down to them. How like Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb there in 1939, when they all gathered in Cooperstown, they were talking who would be the first pick for a baseball team. Cobb, Ruth both immediately said George Sisler, So we would have a round table, and, we get several hundred people come to these round tables, and it's like, I believe half the session should be 2 parts. One, we talk about the guest, the person we honor. And, bring anything you have, because the second part is like show and tell when you're in third grade. Bring your memorabilia about this period. 1922, one of the great Browns teams, one of the best in all of baseball for many reasons. And I'll send you something I just wrote about them. But, you had Sisler. You had the best outfield in baseball of all time. Nobody knows this. Kenny Williams, Baby Doll Jacobson, and Johnny Tobin. The only team where they all played the 5 years, and the only players to ever hit over 300 for 5 straight years in an outfield together. And it would have been 6, except the next year Johnny Tobin hit 299. Well, not only did this one guy bring in, he had in his collection the game-used bats of the starting 8 players of the 1922 Browns. Another guy had a uniform from the 1922 Browns. Plus, we had all George Sisler's personal memorabilia from his grandchildren telling stories. So we energize people like that several times a year. We're having those. And then besides our luncheon, the one thing I do, and I'm getting ready this week to announce this year's special. The Gateway Grizzlies is a minor league team that plays just across the river in Illinois, about 5 minutes away from Busch Stadium. They're in the Frontier League. And I started several years ago on the accolades of our book, our film, and everything, because when we filmed over there for part of the scenery in the film, converting that to look like old Busch Stadium the locker rooms, the owner's office out on the field, looking like, it was back in the 1920s and 30s. We started doing Browns night at the Gateway Grizzlies. And what I'll do is I'll pick a player, and, they give me all these liberties. And I say, okay, let's say George Sisler. Well, that night, the Browns the Gateway Grizzlies will wear 1922 Browns uniforms. And I always put the visitors in Senators uniforms, just, see 2 defunct American League teams. And then they give away a George Sisler bobblehead. And then there's a local brewery that crafts these cans of beers with a 1922 Vienna Ale in it. And it has George Sisler's photographs and all his stats in the can. So both the bobblehead and the beer can become collective. And we sell out that minor league stadium. 3 hours before the game, people are already wrapped around it because they want to get in and get their bobbleheads. But so there is this energy, there's this emotion, whether it's the lunch and the round tables, the nights at the Grizzlies. So,
All right, well, so tell me then how. I guess the question from the outsider perspective is, this is a team that, by all accounts, was probably one of the worst sort of teams in terms of record, right, over the years. One World Series appearance and clearly with another team so powerfully entrenched in the St. Louis psyche as the Cardinals, how does this team somehow magically stay alive beyond your efforts? Where is the nostalgia coming from? Because frankly, that's pretty rare as the years roll on, right? Especially for a team that hasn't been real since the 1950s.
Right. It's been 68 years, and people say, I get calls all the time from writers, newscasts, whatever. I say, how is it you are getting 400 people to come to a luncheon? Who cares? Well, these people do. Some of them are the guys who, they're in their 80s or 90s now that watched them. But so many people are young. And it was like, I want to know about this team. My grandfather loved this team. He would always wear a Browns hat or a Browns sweatshirt. Why is it, Somebody last 2 weeks ago, I was watching Going My Way, the Bing Crosby movie. And why was he having a Browns thing on all over, 1944? And really it comes down to they were a loved team. There was the Cardinals, which were always winning, Branch. The thing of it is the Browns have this hard luck story. They have this story about things could have gone so many points along their tenure, a crossroads. If they would have taken the other crossroad, they probably would have been the team here in St. Louis, and the Cardinals should have been gone. It starts with Branch. Rickey was a Brown, and he ran them. He was a manager. He even played for him, and he wanted to build the farm system. And Philip DeCatsby Ball, the owner, wouldn't allow him to do it. and they had these tremendous ego clashes. And he finally,
they also shared the same stadium too.
well,
which
I
can help, right?
Yeah, not from the start. They actually, the Browns owned Sportsman's Park from the get-go, and the Cardinals played at Robeson Field, which is about 5 blocks from where Sportsman's Park was. It was the last wooden grandstand in the major leagues. And, it kept having, in those days, men smoked cigars, right? It would catch fire, like a lot of them across the country, but the rest of them were starting to build concrete and steel. And the Cardinals, from the time they came into the major leagues in the National League in 1892, up until, really 1920, they were bottom feeders. They were terrible. They were much worse than the Browns. There isn't much comparison between the two. St. Louis was a Browns town until Branch Rickey leaves the Browns and goes to work for Sam Braden, who had just bought the Cardinals, and says, "I want to win. Do whatever you can to make me a winner." So now you got Branch Rickey, just chomping his bits. Great baseball genius, but one of the craziest, most egotistical, probably ornery men you'll meet from what everyone tells the stories. So he sets about the idea of creating the farm system. And at the same time, paralleling that is the situation where Robeson Field burns down. Now the Cardinals are in a world of hurt. They don't have a stadium. Where are they going to play? And they don't have a lot of money because they haven't been winning. So they have to build it. It's going to cost a lot of money. They don't know how to do that. Or so they just moved to a new town, into a new city and a new stadium. Well, Branch Rickey, knowing what he used to clash with Philip Ball, the Browns owner, that he was a cheapskate, comes up with a third idea, and he goes down the 5 blocks and tells them, "Look, if you're a really good businessman, why do you leave your stadium unused half the year? Because you're on the road for half the 154 games, and the other half you're using it. But when you're not here, how about the Cardinals come in and play? And we can use your stadium and look at the money you're going to get." And he shows them this big amount of money. But Ball just doesn't divide it by the 30-year lease and whatever, and it's really not that much money a year. So all of a sudden the Cardinals have not much, they're not paying a lot to maintain a stadium and upkeep and, all the things that it does. And all he does is take that money and invest into the minor leagues and creates the minor leagues, something that Ball said was too expensive. And now all of a sudden Rickey has all the money. And then on top of it, he took the land where Robeson Field was, sold it to the St. Louis City School District, which was in dire need of a school in that area. He jacked up the price. They gave it to him. He adds that money to minor league systems. And by the way, that school that I'm speaking about, they build there, that high school, is the one I spoke of earlier, that in the 1940s and 1950s had more men in the major leagues than any other high school in the United States. So what goes around comes around. So that was one of these big turning points. And then Philip DeCatsby Ball, he died a few years later. And what happened was his family didn't want to invest any of his portfolio back into the ball stadium. And for multiple years, the team was run by a bunch of estate lawyers. And their whole idea was to protect the wealth of the estate and not invest in the team. And, they would sell off good players. And that's where they started kind of doing this dive in their history of through the 30s. They had, and I just did an interview with one of the writers on, is it really true that, 80,000 people, in a whole season? Well, yeah, that is true. But it was also during the Great Depression too, and people did they have food? They have money for this or that. And going to baseball games was a lesser priority when you could listen to it on home. So in the meantime, Rickey invests all that money. And what's he get? He gets a World Series team in 26, 28, 30, 31, 34, 42, 43, 44, 46. if he would have invested with the Browns could have had it. If the Catsby Ball said, no, you can't come in my stadium, Cardinals would have been out of St. Louis. And the other thing was one of these forks in the turn is in 1922, the great teams led by George Sisler. In 1922, they lost the pennant by one game to the New York Yankees. It was a fantastic battle throughout the year. The problem is the greatest hitter in baseball, George Sisler at that time, who was batting well over 420, he got hurt in early September. Taking a wild throw from the shortstop, he jammed and tore his shoulder. And basically for 3 weeks, you didn't have George Sisler. And then slowly they kept losing games and lost by one game. What would have happened in 1922 if the Browns had won the pennant and been the first team, because the Cardinals aren't going to win until 26, the first team to win a pennant in St. Louis? I mean, it could have etched their franchise. I think as you go through their history more and more, you find this is all missing. There's a situation that comes up. Even in 1944, hey, we win the pennant, right? But who do you have to go against? You don't even get the full limelight of your city because you're going to have to play the Cardinals, to really see who's the best. And even in that series, Stan Musial always talked about, we were the underdogs. Everybody was rooting for the Browns to win. So, I mean, and there's so many instant, one right after the other. If just a little bit had gone different, things could have happened. And, even when Bill Veeck bought the team, he was going to run the Cardinals out of town. I own the stadium. I'm kicking them out of the stadium. The owner of the Cardinals is going to jail for tax evasion. Fred Sy, that was. And it looked like they were gone. It looked like they were going to Houston, except then Augie Busch, owner of Anheuser-Busch, stepped in and said, I think I could sell a lot of beer if I owned a baseball team. So,
well, let's back up for a second. You mentioned the Ball estate, which I guess was 33 to 36, essentially owned the team. And then Donald Lee Barnes buys the team in 36 and is the owner during this period of time when the Browns achieved their highest pinnacle of on-field success, meaning that 1 year in 44 where they went to the World Series. Give me a sense, though, around that time, because it seems like Barnes also kind of came to the conclusion, and maybe even before their on-field success, that maybe St. Louis couldn't afford, shall we say, two franchises. And obviously a lot of war effort and distractions and economic challenges and stuff, I'm sure, sort of weighing on him as well. But do I have this right, that there was a possibility that the Browns, he was maybe thinking about trying to get the Browns to go to L.A. a full decade or so before the National League actually did it in the 50s?
Yeah, about 16 years earlier. He bought the team from the Barnes, from the Ball estate, and he put together a conglomerate. And he was trying to win in the late 30s and early 40s, but again, basically what happened was he inherited not only a depleted team of good players, but kind of a depleted franchise, the minor league system. Everything was a mess. So, they didn't have good minor league players and teams. And then he was trying to put that all together when the war hit. So he looks at it and says, one way to get a better revenue stream is to go west. Young man, as Horace Greeley would say. And there's a lot of parallels to that story to Stan Kroenke and the Rams. I'm going out to California and have it all to myself. And he worked the train and airline schedules and got this through to all the other 7 American League presidents. And by the way, the man who did all the grunt work and was the real executive and general manager of the Browns through all this was Bill DeWitt Sr., who is the father of Bill DeWitt Jr., who owns the Cardinals. And there are some key stories that take place with Bill DeWitt we can talk about later, when we get to Eddie Goodell and Pete Gray and Willard Brown and Hank Thompson. But at this period, they've got it all done. And they're going to go to Los Angeles, and they are going to have a big announcement dinner. The press, everybody's coming. We're going to announce this and make this happen. And the dinner is scheduled for December 8th, 1941. This, once again, is one of those little paths in the road that just doesn't take the right path. Because the day before is Pearl Harbor, everything shuts down. Baseball won't go west, until 1957, ends out back in New York. But it was, how do I get some money and revenue back in this team and get this team back in shape? And, California was starting to grow, and transportation was the key that it could happen. And, if Pearl Harbor had not changed the world, there definitely would have been a Browns team in California. They would have it all to themselves. They would have had all the riches and the financial opportunity to grow. And instead, the war comes. They work, they struggle, and they had some decent teams starting to build in 42 and 43.
Yeah, ironically, it seems like they management seemed to take advantage of the fact that most of the bigger teams with deeper pockets had a lot of their best players poached for war duty, whereas the Browns, I guess, either luckily or cunningly did not.
Probably cunningly and strategically is a better term, and the credit really goes to Bill DeWitt Sr., that he put together what many call the best 4F team ever in baseball. And, the Browns only
describe 4F for our younger listeners.
4F gave you, you let you out of military service. It could be you had a health infirmity, of some reason that you could not, be a soldier or a sailor, or there was some family issue. And he put together and strategically placed this whole team across the country at times. And so as he found men who had played several years earlier and were out of baseball, and he brought them back because they were over the age to enlist or be drafted. They may have had a minor issue. There were also men where he could get exceptions because a lot of people had to work in the war industry, working in the torpedo plants or working in the munition plants, doing these types of things where they were, required to work. And to give you a couple examples, he would, as I said, station them. And, we had Denny Galehouse lived in Cleveland, and he had to work this job. But on the weekends, he was off, and he would immediately take a train Friday night to arrive on Saturday to pitch Saturday's game. And, he was one of their aces in the American League. And then he would head back to Cleveland to where they're going to be the next weekend. You had guys like Chet Labes who worked in, a torpedo factory. And, he would work part-time and come in through this. And, there were some things that they would kind of play to keep people from getting drafted as well. I mean, the Cardinals were notorious for that. Branch Rickey, he controlled Musial. When you say, well, how did Musial stay on the team in 42, 43, and 44? And then finally, towards the end, he did get he was drafted and went into the Navy. But I mean, if you look at the New York Yankees team of 1943, there's 8 starting players were all gone to the military. But DeWitt worked very, very hard strategically getting men into the Browns fold and working around their military commitment at 4F status. And he put together a heck of a team. Like I said, they had improved, but like you said, everybody started losing some players. They only lost one guy, and it worked, and they came down and won the pennant. But then again, they didn't get to have the full limelight of the city because they had to share it with the Cardinals. And the Cardinals, as we said, they had been an institution. They had the National League MVPs of 42, 43, and 44 to throw at the Browns, and they were just so deep from their farm system. And you get into the World Series. Browns win.
The irony, I think, has lost, was stunned to recognize that the 1944 World Series was an all St. Louis affair. It was the Browns and the Cardinals in the same park. The only time, with the asterisk exception of 2020, when the pandemic, kind of truncated and kept it in Arlington, Texas. But that had to be fascinating.
The Yankees and the Giants played in the same Polo Grounds before the Yankees moved into the Yankee Stadium in 23.
Ah, okay, interesting. Okay, very interesting. But still, the fact that St. Louis it was the king of baseball cities at the time. Describe that. Was everybody? I'm guessing there was the Browns outdrew the Cardinals that year generally. What was this? What was the city like that year? And
well, there's a couple things about that is really, you talk about irony. I talked about the Bing Crosby movie Going My Way, which wins the Academy Award for the 1944 film period. And throughout that, he plays the Catholic priest, and he's always wearing Brown's hat, Brown's jacket. And by the way, a guy last month called me and said, "Hey, my dad got that jacket, Bing Crosby's jacket. He was in the RKO prop thing, so I don't, whether he does have it or not, because he's supposed to give me some more information on it." But when that was filmed, there was no World Series yet. And 1944, what was the second best and the most popular film of the year? And it was just on every television station a month and a half ago. Meet Me in St. Louis. And with Judy Garland, that came out also. They were celebrating the 40th anniversary of the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 and 1944. And the world was singing, because of this movie, Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis, And gosh darn, what happens in October 1944? It's Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis for the World Series as the two teams play one another. And, the town really, you got to remember, the Cardinals had been there in the World Series in 42 and 43. And as Stan Musial said, we were the underdog. Everybody wanted the Browns to win. They win the first game. And they should have won the second game. They were leading, and Nels Potter threw a ball into the right field corner on a bunt, allowing the Cardinals to get back in the game and eventually win in extra innings. And they win the third. So in reality, here's one of these fates of the Browns. It could have been, the whole story of the Browns' history is it could have been, it could have been up 3-0 And at that time, no one had ever come back by 3-0 to win a World Series. And it just didn't happen.
all right, what's this? LinkedIn Jobs. Hey, these days, it can be hard to find and hire the right candidates for your small business. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs made it easier to find the people that you want to talk to faster and for free. You can create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 770 million people. Holy mackerel. I added that part. Focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, and use screening questions to get your role in front of only the most qualified. Then, use the simple tools on LinkedIn Jobs to quickly filter and prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/goodseats. That's linkedin.com/goodseats to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And now, back to our conversation. After the war, though, it seemed like that it really sort of exacerbated the Browns' futility, right? I mean, having sort of climbed that mountain, so to speak, coming all so close, it almost felt like that the war, being over and some of the top players finally coming back to actually resume to the extent that they could their careers. It really feels like that was sort of a period that maybe almost accelerated the disparity, perhaps, of the Browns' ability to compete on the field at that level.
There's a couple things there. Going into 1945, the Browns were picked to win the American League again. And they felt they had the same strong core. And, the war was still going on. As the clock ticked to 1945, you got to remember, halfway through the 1944 season, the Americans hadn't even landed on Normandy Beach for D-Day, And when the World Series happened, they were still not too many miles from, the English Channel, working their way up through France. So, I mean, the war was still thought that it would be a while as spring training came about. And then things started to unfold fast on the war front, but it was still thought that, the Browns had the nucleus for 1945. But here's one of those other situations. The team was confident. They felt good. They were getting some guys back as, their service time would be up and they would come home. And the Browns brought up a gentleman by the name of Pete Gray. Pete Gray had been the MVP of the Sally League. He had led in multiple offensive categories down in the Sally League. Best minor league player. Pete Gray is the one-armed man who played Major League Baseball. Again, one of these things. What's the only team that had a one-armed man? The Browns, Pete Gray. And Pete Gray, he had a little chip on his shoulder throughout life because, some people made fun. He didn't deserve it. Well, he was the MVP, right? And he had super speed. And the man, if you watch him and the film of him catching and hitting and throwing, he could perform. And the other thing about it that I think is probably the most important part of the Pete Gray story, and if you've seen my films, and I can, get you copies, whatever you need, but I had brought into people a gentleman as one example who, as a young child in the early 40s, he had an issue with his leg, and he was kind of a cripple, and his dad took him regularly to Sportsman's Park. You look at that man there. He's playing Major League Baseball, and he doesn't have an arm. Think about what you can do, and with what yes. And it's not only this young man in this film that tells the story, looking back at his childhood 80 years earlier. It's every soldier coming back from the war who was wounded or had something. If Pete Gray can make it in the majors, I can maybe do something, But the problem was, as Pete Gray came in to the clubhouse, all of a sudden the players weren't accepting him. Hey, we won last year. We don't need help. And it caused some consternation, criticism, and unruly behavior in the Browns clubhouse that kind of took this team that was projected to win and turned them into kind of some problems. And they like Mike Krivich, they'd start trading guys who were key cogs. He was a guy who only guy hit over 300 that year for the Browns. But there were such hard feelings about bringing in Pete Gray. And then the second thing is, and I'm here to tell you, the difference between hitting minor league baseball and Major League Baseball is big, even though it's a matter of inches in movement. They figured out how to pitch to Pete Gray, and, changing some movement. And, with one arm, he couldn't adjust real well. And, he had a so-so year, but he was out of baseball. But it was that kind of thing that it caused a disruption on the team. And, and as a result, Pete Gray has been cast somewhat as a joke. Sometimes, he shouldn't have been doing that. But I look at it more as what an inspiration he was to American society and American soldiers coming back. That, look, guys, many of you are wounded. Many of you are deformed, but look at what you try, you can become something. It was also at that time, Donald Barnes was thinking about what you just said. DiMaggio, Feller, that whole 1943 Yankee team is going to be back. Williams, they're all coming. And so he was having some friction with his partner, Richard Muckerman, over this. Although Barnes was this senior owner, Muckerman kind of was liking the gray thing and trying these things. And Barnes basically, sold high, the old saying, and he got out of it. That's really what drove him to sell in 1945. And it was that happening.
Well, and Muckerman struggled to make it financially as well, because they also, I'm guessing they did some renovations to Sportsman Park, and there's the farm team that required some investment for their stadium down in San Antonio, and it seemed like a lot of things were kind of all sort of. Plus, their performance on the field was not doing well. It seems like that was again sort of a precipitous slide on the financial front.
Well,
at least.
Just the dominoes, and those were the areas where Barnes and Muckerman were basically at odds. Muckerman was one. You might say winning the pennant went to his head some, and they wanting to invest in the minor leagues. They built this big stadium in San Antonio, incurred tremendous debt, and all that was coming together. And Barnes said, I've had enough. So then all of a sudden you lose Barnes. Muckerman's somewhat over his head. He's taken out loans, with Major League Baseball and things and others, and he then winds up selling 2 years later to Bill DeWitt Sr. and his brother Charlie. And they will own it and, try to recoup. And they did some things. And what there in itself is one of the other things where, people just ignore or don't know because there's no one but us heralding this. July 1947. On April 15th of that year, Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier. And on July 5th, 1947, Larry Doby breaks the color barrier in the American League. And Bill DeWitt is saying, we need better players. And he goes to the Kansas City Monarchs and acquires actually 3 African-American players from the Monarchs. And he brings up 2 of them, Willard Brown and Hank Thompson, to play. He said, look, we have a large African-American community in St. Louis, and we've got seats for them. And so he's trying to do 2 things, bring in new fans, but also get better players. I mean, Willard Brown's in the Hall of Fame. He was selected as one of the Negro League's players in 2006 to be in the Hall of Fame induction. And then Hank Thompson had 2 marvelous World Series appearances in 51 and 54 with the New York Giants. But, St. Louis is not recognized. I was up at the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City when I was doing some research on one of the books, and I was talking to Ray Downs. So I said, where is the picture of Willard Brown and Hank Thompson here to talk about the Browns? Not only were they the 3rd and 4th men to cross the color line, but St. Louis was the first team to have 2 African-American players. I mean, the Cardinals would not have an African-American player until 1954. And it would be, I always use this expression, American history in 8th grade, you're told Boston is, the cradle of liberty, the beacon city, right? The beacon of democracy. And it would be 1959 before Pumpsie Green would get to step on the field at Fenway Park. But here, the most southern city in all Major League Baseball had 2 African-American players. And does anybody know that? No.
All right, tell me. We can go on forever. I mean, there's so much to unlock here. But tell me, as Tell me about the Bill Veeck era, right? Because in 1951, this is, in many respects, obviously historically, it's true. This is sort of the last sort of great chance, I guess, to resurrect or rehabilitate or bring back this franchise to any level of competitiveness. And, Bill Veeck, right, at the time and in memoriam, right, a flashy and often controversial figure, but if there's anybody who's going to give it his all, maybe not necessarily with the biggest checkbook, you probably couldn't think of a better showman and inventor, if you will, than Bill Veeck to kind of take on this challenge.
I mean, Bill Veeck's the predecessor of Charlie Finley and George Steinbrenner and Mart Schott. I mean, he's all of them put together, and he came along. You got to remember, it was Bill Veeck who took the 1948 Indians to the World Series. Put Larry Doby on the field, the second African American. I mean, there's brought in Satchel Paige, also. He's a winner. So how did he come to St. Louis? Well, he got a divorce, and to manage that divorce settlement, he had to sell his shares in the Cleveland Indians. So he's looking for something, and you got to remember, Bill Veeck goes way back. His dad was the president of the Chicago Cubs back in the 30s. It's Bill Veeck who planted the first ivy in Wrigley Field. So Bill is intent in getting back in baseball because of his roots. And as I spoke earlier, he saw the perfect storm. St. Louis. DeWitt and his brother Charlie had some loans they had to pay off for when they bought the team. They were looking for some help. The Cardinal owner, Fred Sy, is going to jail for tax evasion, tied to a scheme by he, as the accountant, Sam Breeden, who was the prior owner of the Cardinals, who had died of prostate cancer, had tried to build a new stadium and had collected a lot of money but didn't do anything, and the IRS came in, and that's what put him in jail. The Cardinals, by that time, Ricky had left the Cardinals and gone to the Dodgers. And they weren't running pretty smoothly. They were kind of like the Browns back when Philip the Catsby Ball died, period. And Veeck saw his chance to come in, take over the town. He'll create a winner. And when he came, not only did he do things in the style a la P.T. Barnum, he did things that brought people into the stadium. I mean, he had tremendous jumps in attendance in his first 2 years. And, it really looked like there was a good chance the Cardinals would leave and be going to Houston. Like he said, they're in a turmoil in the front office. Their owner's going to jail. I own the stadium. I kick them out. I'm going to own the town. And the people loves Bill Veeck. And I want to tell you, I have interviewed over the years a lot of players who played under Veeck. Don Larson, Eddie Mickelson, Ned Garver, all these people. There's not one person will ever say anything negative about Bill Veeck. They loved him. He was a player's owner. He would sit with them, drink beer, play cards in the clubhouse, and then during the games, he would walk around. He had a wooden leg, and he had an ashtray in his wooden leg too. And he would sit with the fans. He would buy him soda, buy him beer, buy him popcorn. He was out there. And when they weren't playing, whether it was the off season or they were on the road, he was at every Rotary Club, community club in St. Louis, espousing, to be a Browns fan. But he was born in late 51, 52, 53. You got a letter sent to your house. He wrote this poem, Dear Little Miss So-and-so Parks, and it's this poem about, I'm glad you're born in St. Louis and all this. I want you to come to a game, bring your parents to a game, and he would send tickets. And if you happen to be a boy, you also got a contract to appear in 18 years at spring training. And I want to tell you how many people have always brought those out to show me, or even the stories of the guys who in the early 1970s actually tried to go to spring training under the Orioles using that contract. But Veeck really thought he could win. But, he was trying to get the money and resource. And, the other thing is the Yankees did not like Veeck, and they were doing everything to hurt him. But
well, nobody liked Veeck. I mean, a lot of people didn't like him in the baseball
St. Louis,
club.
They loved him. I mean, Veeck always had this thing. As I said, he was the P.T. Barnum of baseball. Come to one of the Browns games, you never know what's going to happen. The game's over. All of a sudden, the wagon gates open, and here comes elephants, clowns. He puts on a circus. Another day, it might be the wagon gates open after the game, and you hear the music of Sweet Georgia Brown, and out come the men carrying a basketball court, and here's come the Harlem Globetrotters and whatever team they're playing, and there's a basketball game. Those are the things he did. So on August 19th, 1951, they're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the American League, which was formed in 1901. Also, Grease Dick Beer, their sponsor, had been, that's when they started. And he promised everybody who came to that game cake and ice cream. So, he's doing these gimmicks to bring people in the ballpark. And according to the lore now, about 300,000 people were at that game. And I mean, I know what the real attendance was. But, people get there and they're looking at their scorecard. In the first game, they're playing the Detroit Tigers, it's just a regular ball game. In between the two games of the doubleheader, the men came out and carrying this cake. Well, everybody thinks there's this gorgeous bathing beauty going to pop out of the cake, right? Because it's one of these big, it's like, 6 men are carrying this huge thing. Instead, this little dude, 3'7" by the name of Eddie Goodell, pops out. And he's wearing a uniform of the Browns. And on the back is number 1/8. Well, people had bought scorecards, and we've got the scorecards there. It said 1/8 on it, right? Well, nobody paid attention to that because that was a gimmick by Veeck because he was full of gimmicks, right? Well, there's his name's Goodell. We can see that. And by the way, that uniform was Bill DeWitt Jr.'s, who owns the Cardinals uniform because he was the bat boy in those days. His dad borrowed his uniform so Eddie Goodell could wear it. And a funny story, side note is, I've talked to Bill, and he was telling us at one of our luncheons that that uniform went to the Hall of Fame eventually. For the first 3 years, it hung in their living room closet, and it was used at Halloween by him or his sister for a Halloween costume. So one of the most precious pieces of baseball memorabilia became a Halloween costume. But anyway, this little guy waves to the crowd and goes in the Browns dugout. Nobody's really thinking at it. And there's a parallel story that Frank Sauce was a superstar, holds many of the college and minor league batting records. But he got pulled into service in end of World War II, and he had to serve some extra years. So he was a 1950 minor league player of the year, picture on Sporting News and all that with all the major league stars. And Bill DeWitt talked him into coming back. He wasn't going to come back and play baseball. He talks him to come in. He's from Washington, Missouri, which is about 40 miles out of St. Louis. The whole town, it's announced Frank Sauce is going to start game 2. He's going to lead off in right field. The town of Washington comes by the busloads. Sportsman's Park, everybody's watching it. Game 2 starts. Frank Sauce is out in right field. Now, only few people know he can't throw. He's hurt his shoulder. And, he's told Bob Young, the second baseman, get your butt out here if something's hit to me because I'm going to have to throw underhand to you. Well, they come in to bat in the bottom of the first inning, and the announcer says, now batting for Frank Sauce, number 1/8, Eddie Goodell. And here come out of the dugouts this little 3'7" little guy up to the plate. The Tigers manager comes running out screaming, what's going on? Ed Hurley, the umpire, tells Zach Taylor to come over. What's going on? Taylor pulls out, here's the contract. Eddie Goodell signs a major league contract. Ed Hurley says, it's real, play ball. Bob Cain's the Tigers pitchers on the mound, and Bob Swift, the Tiger catcher, they're trying to figure out how to throw to a guy who's got a 7-inch strike zone. Cain wants to throw it underhand. Hurley tells him you got to throw it overhand. Swift gets down on like all fours to catch and tells him, no, get in your position. You've seen the infamous photo of Eddie Gaedel, taking 4 pitches, walking down to first base. Jimmy Delsing comes out to pinch run, slaps him on the butt, and goes into immortality. He's asked, why didn't you just swing at one for the heck of it, And he said, because, Bill Veeck was an old Marine, because Mr. Veeck told me if I took a swing, there's a sniper on the roof that'll shoot me dead. And that was that. So, baseball's in an uproar. The commissioner and the other teams, especially the Yankees, they can't stand it. And it was so much that the commissioner, if you look at the 1951 complete record books, which, we've got them, all kinds of record books, you won't find Eddie Gaedel in them because he said it didn't exist. Well, then, wait a minute, who did Bob Kane throw to? Who got on first base? Who did Jimmy Delsing pinch run for? Did Frank Sauce something? So all these things, eventually it's put it back. But baseball is just really getting fed up with Veeck's antics. And, he's warned, but he doesn't listen. 5 days later, August 24th, 1951, he has grandstand manager night, thinking, what the heck? Let's get the fans involved. They're all coming out. They're coming out to his games. And there's one section in Sportsman's Park where if you sat in that section, you got a placard that says yes on one side, no on the other side. Zach Taylor, the Browns manager's in street clothes on a rocking chair on the dugout of Sportsman's Park. And there's a PR guy with all these signs like play up, play back, swing away, bunt, steal, pin, all these little things.
It's like what this fan-controlled football is trying to do now, sort of trying to just basically create the fans basically calling the plays.
Right. And what was funny was, I always use the story about Hank Arf was a big, burly, power-swinging first baseman like of that era, But I also knew Hank very well, and Hank was very, very slow. He was never fast. Well, Hank walks. Up goes the sign. Should he steal? What do the fans do? Yes, and they're playing the Philadelphia Athletics under Connie Mack. And, after an inning or two, the Athletics figured it out. Just watch the stands. Hank's on first. Should he steal? Yeah. I got to do what I'm told, right? Hank takes off. He's thrown out by 25 feet. So Major League Baseball is saying you're making a mockery of the game, Veeck. We don't want you in the game. The trouble is the Browns won the game. So, maybe the Browns fans were better managers, as you just spoke of a moment ago, than the real people. But, Veeck was maneuvering because what happened was Augie Busch of Anheuser-Busch Breweries, the world's largest beer maker, has plans to buy the Cardinals because Augie Busch was going to follow the original Cardinal owner, Chris Von der Eye, who was when he started the team back in the 1870s. I can sell a lot of beer if I had a baseball team because he had a tavern right next to Sportsman's Park. So Busch comes in wanting to buy the Cardinals with his millions and millions and millions of dollars. He wants to buy Sportsman's Park and change the name to Budweiser Park, which is a little anomaly because today how many stadiums are named after alcoholic beverages? And Major League Baseball says, no, you can't do that. And he said, fine, I'll call it Busch Stadium after my name. And they said, that's fine. And then 6 months later, he introduced Busch Bavarian beer and said, screw you, Major League. But once Busch bought the Cardinals, Veeck knew he couldn't stay because the money was going to be with the Cardinals in town. Because Busch had so much money and he wanted to win. And he was looking to go to Milwaukee, but the Red Sox own that geographic part, and they took advantage of it and moved the Braves to Milwaukee. He was also looking at perhaps Baltimore, and there were issues. And basically, at the end of the day, there were several owners in the American League that they just told Veeck he had to leave. And after the 53 season, they blocked any move on him. They wouldn't let him relocate or move. They told him he had to sell. So he was forced to sell the team. They basically took his franchise away. But the irony of it is, a couple years later, they bring him back, and he takes the White Sox to the '59 World Series. So you want to tell me this all makes sense? It was a matter of individual politics, and
Well, it's also interesting too, because you mentioned these pivot points and these sort of what ifs and closing doors kind of situations, right? So, not that the team was doing really well on the field, but they were certainly he was making it entertaining. I mean, let's put it in perspective. I mean, I don't think it was a time they were under Veeck's ownership that they were better than 30 or some odd games behind first place in those years, right?
Yeah, but I guess I would say there's 6 other teams that were kind of bad, because you got to remember, I mean, the Yankees owned the 50s, right?
Oh, sure. No, I get that. But I guess my point though is that it looked like the Cardinals were basically gone. They were going to leave, right? I mean, if Bush doesn't come in and literally save the team, right, you could make the argument that at least the Browns would have had still a fighting chance, and who knows what would have happened. I mean, especially if the Cardinals were going to slump around and maybe wind up going somewhere else or to another city, the Browns might have it at all to themselves, and it would have maybe reinvigorated the franchise, and maybe more could have come from it.
Well, I absolutely agree with that 100%. And Veeck agreed with it 100%. He envisioned the Cardinals would be gone within a year or two. Totally envisioned it, because he knew the trouble that was going on in the front office of the Cardinals. He knew their team had just basically grown old. They weren't the teams that was always there in the hunt in the 40s, and they were distracted. He knew they didn't have a stadium, and he had this plan all laid out that he would own the town. And then when he started getting the roadblocks is when he started looking at the Milwaukee or, moving his team to a new city, because he knew he could not, nor could very few people ever go up against Augie Bush. He carried so much weight, not only in, banks, institutions in the town, but he eventually took his power and became, one of the big powerhouses of major league owners. And, it would have been so much different if Bush had refrained. To the man, people believe the Browns would have been here and the Cardinals would have been in Houston, long before the Colt 45s came.
It seems so inconceivable today, doesn't it?
It does today, but you just look back, you think, man, how easy would it have been for the Browns to be in Los Angeles in 1941? It was very conceivable. And, now we look back and think, the war prevented that. They could have owned the California. They could have owned, back in 1920, all they had to do was say, no, you can't come to Sportsman's Park when Branch Rickey walked down there as the Cardinals stadium was left in ruins. I mean, there were just so many things that could have happened. And, throughout all that history, while these vexing forces are going on, I mean, there's great players. There's decent teams at times, and there's some lousy teams at times. But there's 15 men associated with the Browns that are in the Hall of Fame. And some of the greatest moments, besides Eddie Goodell, besides grandstand manager, I mean, there's some really important things that are tied to the Browns. Like I said, this thing in MLB today that I helped him with, Charlie Raleigh getting his hitting 1 week shy of 59 years old. He batted in the game. Last time he batted was in 1913. There's the two African-American players. There's, George Sisler, Ned Garver, 1951. He wins 20 games for a team that lost 100. They rode him. The era of Satchel Paige, twice an All-Star from the Browns. I mean, you had guys. Another parallel, real quick. 66 men played for both the Cardinals and the Browns, which, is emblematic or what, I don't know. But the thing of it is, you got Rogers Hornsby, Marty Marion, Jim Bottomley, and so on and so on. Some great players. But the problem was they had their great years with the Cardinals and their downhill years with the Browns. I mean, Rogers Hornsby managed the team twice, and he was terrible both times. I mean, but he wasn't a very good manager in any of the cities where he managed. But it's just a unique history. But every spring, people thought this might be the year. Sure, you were 64.5 games out of first place, but last year, but maybe this is the year, because you never know in baseball. And
yeah, well, that sounds like a team that I know on the north side of Chicago that for dozens of years were sort of the same. All right, well, here's my last question, and let's just
the Browns were the lovable losers long before the Cubs.
Yeah, and that's the irony, right? So I guess that sort of is the question, and we'll promote the movie and the books and all that kind of stuff. And if people are this is new to them, they will find that to be rich troves of interestingness that we couldn't even get close to touching in this conversation. But I guess I'll sort of come back to what was sort of one of my first questions, and you kind of brought it up. Why do the Orioles ignore this history? And how, besides these books and the movie, how does this history continue to live on? I mean, there's only so much of people who are actually first-person witnesses to this team left. How and where and in what forms does this history and will this history continue? Certainly you and your colleagues have gone to great lengths to keep this historical society up and running and going. But where will this live? I mean, is the Baseball Hall of Fame helpful in all of this? Is there a St. Louis sports history place? Is there something physical that could be done maybe in the Cardinals organization that could sort of embrace the overlap that the two teams shared a facility for so many years and that kind of stuff, and absorb some of that history because it was St. Louis? What of and how do you see the next couple of memories?
A lot of ways is exactly what all those things you're saying are happening. Cooperstown, let's start there. I have spoken twice at Cooperstown on the Browns. Our films were selected as part of their film series. Festival they have, the limited film festival weekend. And I spoke up there, and it's funny when you're telling these people from New York and Boston, which, is predominant up there in New England, it's the Hall of Fame, and they're going, we've never heard about this. I get on the radio in Baltimore, I'm invited, and people go, I've never heard about this stuff. The Orioles stuck with their minor league franchise history. I mean, John McGraw, Babe Ruth, they were all part of the Baltimore Orioles and many, many, many other players. The Cardinals, Bill DeWitt, who owns it, and his son Bill DeWitt III, as president of the Cardinals, they are very strong partners with us. The St. Louis Cardinal Hall of Fame has a big section about the Browns. We have displays throughout the city where we display our archives. We spend a lot of time going into all kinds of organizations, bringing our portable Browns museum with us. So, I mean, we are very active. And as I said, the things we do, the partnership where, we had the Gateway Grizzly game, 1922, featuring George Sisler. We had 1949. Roy Sievers was the first American League Rookie of the Year in 1949, and we did a year where they dressed as 49 Browns. And by the way, the very first ever MVP in baseball was handed out in 1922, and who did it go to? A Brown, George Sisler. The first Rookie of the Year, as I spoke about, was first awarded in the American League in 1949, and who did it go to? Roy Sievers, a Brown. We did. We had it all set up in 1920 because Don Larson, his fame was one day in October in 1956 for the Yankees, but his love the Browns, he said, "There never been a Browns, there never be a Don Larson." And he would come every year to our luncheons and just sit there and sign autographs. Wouldn't charge a cent to anyone because that's his way of giving back to the Browns. And so we did his bobblehead. We had it all ready for last year when the virus came, but we did it this year, and we will be announcing our coming bobblehead here next week. And, people flock. So, I mean, we're doing things, and people ask that same question. We're doing things to try to make a difference. And to your other point, when there are no Browns, we're down to 4. 2 years ago we had, it was funny, there was a point where we had 9 left, and each one of them played a different position. So we could field a team. We said, get first base with a walker might be hard, but now we're down to 4. I think we've had 3 of the last 4 oldest living major league ball players were Browns. We said losing helped you live longer. And, I've always put in perspective. People say, well, what are you going to do when there aren't any left? I said, we'll keep doing what we're doing. We'll keep spreading history. There aren't any Civil War soldiers. There aren't any World War I soldiers. And there's not many World War II soldiers, but we still herald them with roundtables and luncheons and reunions. And I see no reason why we can't do that for the Browns. And everybody tells me we're with you. We've reinvigorated with the 2 PBS films. Why? I am really appalled that the people in Brooklyn who love the Dodgers so much don't have a fan club. They still don't recognize and remember. I see no reason why we can't continue. And it's these young people who come to our events who want to learn. We have people, we do it in the summer, these luncheons and dinners. So people come from out of town, and they bring their kids. And it's just amazing to stand up on that podium and look at 400 plus people there to talk about a team that hasn't played in 60 plus years and think, wow, how special is this?
All right, not quite sure we gave the full treatment to this very story-rich and idiosyncratic history of this just curious and fascinating team, the St. Louis Browns. Hopefully we'll have Ed or some other folks on in future episodes to kind of go deeper into some, more interesting subtexts of this just fascinating, certainly to me, St. Louis Browns story. But so many things to delve into in the interim that I'd like to recommend to you if you don't already know of them. So grab a pen and paper. Here we go. The website. This is sort of the, it's slick, it's deep, it's just a treasure trove and a great on-ramp to lots of stuff. TheSTLBrowns.com. The letter the, THE, STL Browns, TheSTLBrowns.com. Check that out. That's Ed's labor of love. The society is there. All the links to great stuff. There's a Facebook group. There you go. Devoted to the St. Louis Browns, pretty active, according to Ed. So check that out. You can also send Ed a note directly via email, stlbrowns@swbell.net. In the interim, though, check out the films. They're both available on the PBS St. Louis station called KETC TV. Their website is 9NINEPBS.org. 9NINEPBS.org. And the 2 films you want to look for, you can search them up and stream them and watch them live right there, accessed on demand. The St. Louis Browns, the team that baseball forgot, narrated by John Hamm, is there for you. And you can also check out the sequel, both Emmy nominated, by the way, A Baseball Legacy, Fans Remember the St. Louis Browns. Again, both on 9pbs.org. And of course, must get the 2 books that Ed has written or co-written. The one that's currently out is called Baseball in St. Louis, From Little Leagues to Major Leagues. That's the one he wrote on his own. as well as the other book that he co-wrote with Messrs. Bill Borst and Bill Rogers, called St. Louis Browns, Story of a Beloved Team. Both of those books are available wherever you find good books. Amazon, of course, probably the quickest place. And if you'd like to give us a couple of shekels of love by purchasing that book, by all means, go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode 247 with Ed Wheatley and find a convenient link. Why don't you? And we'll get a couple of referral credits, if you will, for your purchases of said books. We appreciate that. As well as any books you might want to buy through our website. Of course, the website is where you're going to find all of our past and future episodes. Lots of great stuff there. You can send us email at hello. I'm really trying to speed through this. hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's the email address. You want to follow us on social media? You can do that too. You'll find us on Facebook. You'll see us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available, and on Twitter, probably where we're most active, at Good Seats Still. Let's see what else. We've got a weekly email newsletter. Just search the website. You'll find a little link to add your name to that. Go for that. Our thanks, of course, to our pal Jerry Payne. Jerry Payne Audio Excellence. Always a pleasure working with you, and thank you again for sticking around with us this week, kind sir. And let's leave you with a little musical tribute, shall we? This is a very interesting find. We always try to find sort of like original fight songs or theme songs, that kind of stuff. Surprisingly, we didn't really find one for the Browns, although we did find this one from 1972 from an surprising source. His name is Skip Batten. You may remember him as one of the original members of the Birds of the late 60s, early 70s. He was also part of a reconstituted Flying Burrito Brothers. But in 1972, he had an album out, and there was this little ditty on it devoted to, I think, perhaps, maybe some personal memories of the St. Louis Browns. Here it is. Enjoy, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
I got the St. Louis Browns. I got the St. Louis Browns. Since the St. Louis Browns left town. Since the St. Louis Browns left town. Ooh, we're the St. Louis Browns. Tell us what you found. The St. Louis Browns were a baseball team, and they lost more than the Mets could ever dream. They had a one-armed man in left field named Pete Gray in 44. There's no healthy men around to play baseball then. There's all the way fighting in a war. Bill Veeck came along as general manager along about 47. He hired a man to play for them. He stood about 4'11". I got the St. Louis Browns. I got the St. Louis Browns. Since the St. Louis Browns left town. Since the St. Louis Browns left town. Ooh, we're the St. Louis Browns. Tell us what you found. The St. Louis Browns were a baseball team, and they lost more than the Mets could ever dream. St. Louis had a hitter, Roy Sievers was his name, and in that team's dismal history, he hit many homers in many games. They had a no-hit pitcher, he pitched a real humdinger, but Bob Turley got too surly, and they traded him too early. I got the St. Louis Browns. I got the St. Louis Browns. Since the St. Louis Browns left town. Since the St. Louis Browns left town. Ooh, we're the St. Louis Browns. Tell us what you found. mother loved the lonely Browns, although they tried so hard. Meanwhile, folks in Baltimore, they wanted a baseball team. So they called St. Louis up and said, do you think the Browns can leave town and become part of our Baltimore dream? Well, you know what happened. The Baltimore Orioles became a real winning club. And in the hearts of all teenage boys everywhere, who are now in their 30s and 40s. Well, sometimes they look at their fallen out hair. They remember when they had the St.